Everybody. So welcome to the September 2021 board meeting held in public of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or the MHRA, as we prefer to call it. My name is Stephen Lightfoot and I'm the chair of the board, and my role is to lead us through today's agenda. Now, for those of you who've not attended one of our board meetings before, I must start by saying that this is a board meeting held in public and it is not a public meeting. Having said that, of course, we will provide an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions at the end of our meeting. It's also important to explain that our board is responsible for the strategic leadership of the agency and is not responsible for individual regulatory decisions on specific products, as that's done very ably by the officials within the agency with the advice of our independent expert advisory committees. I also make you all aware that we're recording the meeting today, so we can publish the video on our websites and to provide the opportunity for as many people as possible to watch the meeting. I'm also delighted that 51 people have registered to observe the meeting today, with 14 people representing patients or patient groups. We've got 13 representatives from industry, 5 healthcare professionals, and 3 representatives of the media, together with 16 members of our own staff. So thank you for joining us this morning, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. We'll also be joined online by colleagues from the Department of Health and Social Care and also the devolved administrations. So I'm particularly pleased to give a virtual welcome to Catherine Glover, who's the Deputy Director for Medicines Regulation and Prescribing at the Department of Health. Greg Chalmers, who's the Head of the Chief Medical Officer's Policy Division in the Scottish Government, and also Cathy Harrison, the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer of Northern Ireland. You'll also see that we're holding our first in-person board meeting for 18 months, and there are a number of new people around the table who've joined the board since our last meeting, as the terms of 4 of our previous non-executive directors came to an end in August. And so ministers have appointed new non-executives to replace them. So I think it would be useful just to go around the table and first of all to for everybody to introduce themselves with their name and their job title. So June, do you want to start?
Morning, everybody. I'm June Rain. I'm the CEO here at the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Junaid Bajwa, new non-exec director.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Alison Kay, Chief Safety Officer at MHRA.
Good morning. My name is Michael Whitehouse. I'm a non-executive director and I'm also chair of the audit committee.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Raj Long. I'm a non-executive director and I'm a deputy director of the Gates Foundation.
Good morning, Paul Goldsmith, new non-executive director.
Good morning, Haider Hussain, associate non-executive director.
Good morning, Mark Bailey, Chief Scientific Research and Innovation Officer.
Morning, Mandy Calvert, non-exec director and chair of Organisation Development and Remuneration Committee.
Good morning, John Fundry, Chief Operating Officer.
Good morning, Mercy Jessingham, non-executive director and chair of the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee.
Good morning, I'm Natalie Richards. I'm the head of the Executive Office and I'll be taking the note today.
Right, thank you everybody. And I think also just to remind board members just to raise your voice when you are speaking, just to make sure that members of the audience can hear us. And also particularly congratulations to you, Mark. Obviously you've just been recently promoted to the role of Chief Scientific and Innovation Officer. And I just wanted to say thank you for your application and congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you very much, Steve.
So we should all have access to a board pack of papers for today's meeting, and I'm going to use the page numbers in that board pack to guide us through the meeting. I'll also assume that everybody's read the pack, so we can spend most of the time on discussion today rather than presentation. We've got some pre-submitted questions from members of the public, which we'll answer at the end of the meeting. And also members of the audience on the live stream will also be able to ask questions of the board through the chat function. And again, our Director of Communications, Rachel Balsworth, will collate those and we'll be able to cover those again at the end of the meeting, or as many of them as we possibly can. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. Can I just check, Natalie, have I missed anything?
No, I don't think so, Stephen.
Okay, everyone else content. So that being the case then, they're the priorities for the meeting. Can I first of all, we'll start with apologies. We do have apologies that I'm aware of Professor Graham Cook, one of our new non-executive directors, who had a long-standing commitment for today before he was appointed. We've had apologies from our interim Chief Quality and Access Officer, Sam Atkinson, our interim Chief Technology Officer, John Quinn, and our Director of Governance, Carly McGurry. So that's really all the apologies I'm aware of. If we move on to declarations of interest, because there are a number of new members of the board, I think it would be helpful just to go through the register of interests that have been declared during the appointment process. And I think just a summary for transparency will be helpful for members of the public. So, Junaid, could I just start with you and just ask you just to reiterate what your declarations are?
Absolutely, happy to. So I'm a GP. I'm the Chief Medical Scientist at Microsoft Research, and I sit on the board of a number of NHS trusts and on the board of Nafi Medical Corporation in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, thank you for that. Raj, can I come to you next, please?
Thank you. I'm Raj Long. I am currently an employee of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as an employee. I also am an ex-employee of BMS and Novartis. These are all declared in my DOI, which is on the website. I have a number of advisory roles with Gates Ventures, Neuronet, Huya Biosciences, and African Pharmacovigilance Advisory Board called PAVIA. And I also support the World Health Organization.
Okay, thank you.
And sorry, one more thing. In the context of the Gates Foundation, as of June, I am no longer the responsible officer for any work done with the MHRA.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Paul.
Thank you, sir. I'm a consultant neurologist practicing in the NHS. I'm a board member of the Medical Defence Union. I'm a trustee of the Big Tent Foundation and of another charity called Radix that is just combined together. I'm also president and director of Closely Medicine, which is developing drug and digital therapeutic products, and had previously been involved in founding several other companies, of which I still have some share options or holdings, including Daniel Labs, which was acquired by Summit Therapeutics, which is now a US company, and Psychology Online, now known as IUSO Digital Health.
Okay, thank you very much. Hader.
Thanks, Stephen. I serve as the Chief Operating Officer for Health Nova Limited, which is a private health tech consultancy. I serve as a non-exec of Milton Keynes University Hospital. I also serve as a trustee of Dementia Carers Count. I have shares in Microsoft through previous employment, and I have a family member who is a reporter for the BBC.
Okay, thank you very much. Mandy, I think you wanted to raise an extra declaration or update your declaration.
Yes, so I have a small consultancy, and they're working for a pharmaceutical company called Athenex, who are in the process of submitting an INAP and MAA at the moment.
Okay, so they were the new declarations. Were there any others that existing board members wanted to raise? I think it's, well, thank you for doing that. I think it's very important that we are transparent. All of the declarations will be published on our website and will continue to be updated. I will continue to work with the Governance Office to ensure that appropriate mitigations are put in place should there be a conflict on any of the board agendas that we discuss. You know, that could involve asking a board member to step out of the room. I think it's probably unlikely because we are unlikely to be reviewing any specific product applications at this particular board. But again, I think we should always just keep this under constant review, and I'll continue to work with individuals and the Governance Office to achieve transparency and fairness in everything that we do. Okay, well, thank you for that. So the next item would then be to move on to the board minutes from the last meeting. And I know that not everybody was there, but on page 2 of the board pack, we've got the minutes of the last meeting. So for those of you that were there, can I just check that they are, first of all, a true record of that meeting?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. I'm hearing nods around the table. Well done, Natalie. Okay, so let's approve the minutes of the last meeting. And then if I can move on to the actions, please. So that's on page number 8. There's a few actions that are relevant, have got a due date of today. So action number 21 is on the agenda. So that's a review of the governance of medical devices, and that's in part of Mercy's report, which we'll hear later. Item number 33 about the yellow card biobank. Alison, that was due today. Can you give us a verbal update?
Yes, I'll give you a verbal update. For those who may not be aware, the Yellow Card Biobank is a new initiative which seek to recruit patients who have submitted a yellow card for a drug or vaccine with an adverse drug reaction of interest to us, which we would like to further explore the underlying mechanism. And the scoping project aims to evaluate the scientific, ethical and legal considerations for the establishment of such a biobank, as well as looking at options for a business model. And as I say, it has at its core a drive to better understand the underlying mechanism of any adverse drug reactions. So stakeholder input into design is a key requirement, and activities have been running throughout the project with virtual events held with healthcare professionals, patients and members of the public, scientific community, and in the future, the pharmaceutical industry and other government bodies. And the main focus has been to gauge support for the initiative, to present the plans and seek feedback for those proposals around recruitment and consent, sample collection, linkage and access. Events held to date have indicated high support for the initiative and generated some very useful and detailed feedback on the proposals. And we're looking in the future to further increase the consultation size and ensure representativeness of the participants in the future events. And we have presented those plans to the Patient Safety Engagement Committee, who were supportive of work and made a number of valuable suggestions. So we're going forward and increasing this engagement in the future.
Excellent. I think that's a very comprehensive reply, so thank you for that. So I think we can close that action, because I think that there's clearly consultations being ongoing and will continue to be as we move forward, I think. So item number 34 was around the genomic medicines. June, can you give us an update on that?
Yes, happy to give an update. Colleagues may be aware that in January we launched the Innovative Licensing and Access Pathway, and the important aspect of this is that it brings together, where relevant, the genomic medicine and the in vitro diagnostics. And last month, for example, we looked at the thalassemia treatment that actually does this too. So that is our main step in relation to the life sciences sector deal 2 commitment. But there is more to say. We'll be looking this afternoon at the consultation on medical devices, which includes in vitro diagnostics. And as you know, our transformation, colleagues will remember, brings together these two areas so that we get this fertile synergy between the diagnostic and the genomic medicine. And just to finish, Chair, our National Institute for Biological Standards and Control in the Science and Research Innovation area is working with the Gene Therapy Manufacturing Innovation Centre in Sheffield. So we've got 3 strands of work now that all deliver very meaningful progress for the life sciences sector deal commitment. I think we could, though, publish something specific around genomic medicines. And if the board agrees, I think we should take that forward. It's all there, but perhaps we need to, if you like, make it clear that this is how we're working to support genomic medicines as the life sciences vision mandates us to.
Well, I think it's a key part of the life sciences vision, isn't it, June? So what had you in mind in terms of what to publish and when?
I think something on our website that simply talks about the pathway for a new genomic with an in vitro diagnostic that brings together the various strands that are underway, but may not be as visible as they could be.
Okay. Would the board be content with that as a proposal? Seems eminently sensible to me, I've got to be honest. So, okay, Natalie, if we could just take an action then to publish an update on the genomic pathways on our website. And what sort of timescale, June?
I would say within the next 2 to 3 weeks, so that colleagues involved have a chance to look at the messages they'd like to convey to developers.
Perfect. Okay, if everyone's content with that, we can close that action and we'll open that new action just on the publication, but that'd be great. Thank you for that. The other remaining action for today will be item number 55, and that's about leadership champions for diversity. June, is there an update on that?
Clearly, as you announced, Chair, at the beginning of the meeting, our executive team is building up, and over the next 2 months, there'll be new membership and new roles to be allocated. So specific roles to specific executive team members are yet to be allocated, but that doesn't mean in any way at all that the work has stopped. I'm pleased to say that working with the chair of our staff partnership group, there was a video that celebrated NHS Pride over the summer, and you and I have also been meeting with chairs and chief execs of the other arm's length bodies to build on best practice ideas. And maybe this is something, once our executive team is on board, we can come back to.
Yeah, and it's something that Mercy and I have been involved in. Is actually meeting the non-executives for other arm's length bodies on diversity, and we're getting some quite useful feedback, which again, I think we need to bring back into this forum at some point, Mercy, when we're ready to do so. Okay, so I think that completes that action as well. Were there any other matters arising from the last set of minutes? No? Okay, that will be great. So let's thank you for your input on that. If we can move on to the first substantive item then, please. That's on page number 10, and it's around board governance. This again just reflects the fact that we have appointed 5 new independent non-executive directors and the 4 new executive directors, as June mentions. And so it does feel like an appropriate time just to review our governance arrangements. I think it's also appropriate at this particular point also just to make and record a special thanks to Dr. Sam Atkinson, to John Quinn, and to Dr. Christian Schneider for their work in their interim chief officer roles over the last year, while we've been putting the new plans for transformation together. I think it's appropriate that we record those thanks in our minutes, please, Natalie. I think it's very important to do so. But I think as we move on, I think it's also, I hope the paper is self-explanatory. And I think we're going to go through 4 individual decisions. But maybe just before we do that, if I could just direct everybody to page 15 in the board pack, and that's the diagram of the governance arrangements of the agency. And this might be an appropriate time just to ensure that new members are content with the assurance map that we have, because as you can see on the diagram, there is an ultimate accountability to Parliament. That's obviously through the Department of Health. We've obviously got the agency's leadership role through June as the accounting officer, the strategic leadership of the agency through the board, the operational leadership through the executive committee, and then we've got strategic assurance committees and operational delivery management committees. So can I just check if particularly the new members are clear about the assurance map, and if there are any questions on that specifically to start with? It's not a trick question. No. Michael.
Just a couple of observations. I think the paper is very good and very clear. As this is a board meeting in public, I think it's important to emphasise the fact that as it's presented in here with the audit committee, it looks, well, it is that there are equal number of non-executive and executive members of that committee. It is accepted good practice that non-executives should be in the majority. That is reflected in the individual terms of reference for this committee, and to give the assurance that in the unlikely event that there was ever a conflict, the chair of the committee, of the audit committee, would have the casting vote, and that's really to reinforce the independence element.
Yeah, and that is also the case, I believe, with the other assurance committees as well, where we've got non-executive chairs with a casting vote if necessary. But because I think the background to that, I think, Michael, for new members, is the fact that as a unitary board with an equal number of executive and non-executive directors, we wanted there to be parity through the assurance committees as well. But to maintain the governance, the casting vote of the non-executive chair was the way to achieve the non-executive majority.
And very much as senior independent director, I'm very happy with that. Thank you.
Okay. So that's the assurance map, just to ensure there's clarity about our role in this. So if we just move on to the 4 different decisions that we've been asked to make today. First of all, from page 16, we've got in Annex 2 the revised terms of reference. They're broadly similar to the previous version, but they've been updated with the experience of the last year to reflect custom and practice, and also to ensure there's clarity on our terms of reference. Can I just ask, before I ask people to agree them, are there any questions or understanding around the terms of reference? Michael?
Again, just one question. I think we need to recognise that the agency status is changing, so it ceases to be a trading fund from the 1st of April next year 2022. There is also the formal framework agreement that determines the relationship between the department and the agency. Really appreciate the loading on the department having to deal with the pandemic, but I think it is important over the next 6 to 8 months that we actually make sure that that framework agreement reflects the change in the agency and that gives clarity to our role. I emphasize that because we are a regulator, and the independence argument needs to be very much at the fore. I have no reason to suggest that we're not independent, but it's always good practice to have that fully documented.
Yeah, I can update you on that, Michael, because I've been having discussions recently with colleagues in the sponsor department of the Department of Health. It makes our last framework agreement was actually signed in 2016. And it makes sense to have a new framework agreement in place for the 1st of April next year, when we will cease to be a trading fund. And I think the intention is to coincide that. That's sort of the broad timescales.
Okay, thank you. I'm assured by that. Thank you.
Okay, Mandy.
Yes, I don't know, in terms of reference, where there might be a little stronger emphasis on the governance and controls responsibility of the board. The strategy is laid out quite clearly, but our governance and controls responsibility, I think, just needs to be brought out a little bit more clearly.
And specific, can you give
in item 2.2, the purpose of the board?
So again, linking back to the accountability map, ultimately the real accountability resides with June as the accounting officer, so not the board. I think, as I understand it, June.
Yes.
So because actually June is the person that is directly responsible both to Secretary of State and to Parliament and to the Permanent Secretary. So the real strength of governance is actually through the accounting officer, as I understand it. So the board isn't ultimately the final decision maker on any key decisions.
No, I mean, I think this is a really difficult one, and just give a bit of clarity. You're quite right to say, just drawing on my previous experience, June will have a letter of appointment as accounting officer, which will set out very clearly her responsibilities, particularly in relation to the stewardship of money and resources that the agency has within its purvey. Ultimately, June is accountable to Parliament and the Committee of Public Accounts to demonstrate that she's used that money effectively, and Mandy's point that there are effective controls, both financial and over value for money, in place. The role of the board should be to support June in that respect, and the whole assurance committee process and structure, which I think is very strong, should help give that assurance. So I think Mandy's point is right. The board is supporting June in that role, but ultimately June is accountable to Parliament in that respect. So I think Mandy's point is made, really, that to give that support, we need that assurance. So I would support that argument.
Mandy, do you want to come back on that?
I think so. It probably is captured there. It's just perhaps.
Yeah.
I would just put it up a second to strategy, just to.
I would agree. That's
yeah, and I think the board does have a role in ensuring that its processes are effective. You know, and maybe actually part of the solution to that is also to make it more visible that actually the board should constantly, and at least on an annual basis, be reviewing its effectiveness to ensure that it has got the strength of governance and the strength of assurance, you know, working both up and down through the organisation. So I wonder whether we can maybe strengthen that. Would that help?
Yes, and I think that independence piece that Michael makes.
Okay, I think that's a view. You've got that, Natalie.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think obviously I think we can on that basis. I think we can strengthen that. That 2.2 paragraph. I think that makes sense. With that aside, was there any other comments on or were there any other comments on the proposed terms of reference? Okay, so with the one amendment to 2.2, can I suggest that propose that we approve that? Am I seeing nods around the table? Great. Okay, so the terms of reference with that one change to 2.2 can be approved. The next section, going back to page 13, was around the committee membership. Having had discussions with each individual non-executive director, I've actually proposed the membership of the new committees. We need as a board to formally approve that. Can I ask if the board is content with the proposals on the assurance committee membership?
Yes.
I'm seeing nods around the table. So, okay. So Natalie, we can say the committee membership is approved. I've then on page 14 talked about the role of a deputy chair and the role of a senior independent director. These are, differentiated those roles, something I introduced when we introduced the unitary board last year. I think the roles are different. So the deputy chair of the board is effectively a reserve in the event that I'm not able to be present and to attend the meeting. The senior independent, and actually I think as a principle, my proposal was a year ago that if the chair is a non-medic like myself, I think it'd be good practice to have a medic as the deputy chair, or vice versa. I think we need a balance of medical and non-medical skills in the senior leadership of the board. Similarly, the senior independent director, I think actually it could also be the sounding board. So should any director have concerns about the way the board is functioning, then the senior independent director would be the route of discussion if they can't have the discussion with myself or with June. I think then it's also important that we review our board effectiveness, as we just mentioned, and so actually I think the senior independent director has got a role in that, and actually that also links with the role of the chair of ARAC. So it's maybe not a complete surprise, as Michael was the senior independent director 1 year ago. I'd like to re-propose that Michael is the senior independent director for the board, and that Professor Graham Cook, who sadly can't be here today, is our deputy chair, but I need the board's consent with that.
Agreed.
Okay, so I'm seeing nods around the table. So again, I think thank you for that. So we can make note of that both of those proposals have been approved. And then finally, sorry to be so pedantic and just work through this systematically, but on page 24, we've got a board schedule of business. The board schedule of business, I think, needs to continue to flex to reflect the reality of a current situation. But I think it's helpful to have a number of standing items. So there is a regularity of assurance from our assurance committees. And also there's certain key performance items that we can then review on a regular basis. There will be other items that will need to be added to this, depending on the needs of the moment. So, and that will continue to evolve on a month-by-month basis. But as a principle, can I ask if there's any observations about the board schedule and if we're content to go along with that?
The only comment I would make is obviously the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee would always like to have a pre-look at the company deliverables before it comes to the board. And I think you and I have discussed this anyway, Stephen, so we're going to ensure that happens, so that we get kind of an early look before it comes to the board.
Yeah, I think there's an element of just scheduling that, Mercy. That would always be the intention that any sort of major items for any of the assurance committees would be reviewed by the committee before it comes to the board, because I just think that's good practice and good governance and good sense. So there's just an element of getting the timing right on that. Michael?
Yeah, I have one other suggestion. I think it works very well when the three committees periodically come together to share experience and good practice. So I wouldn't change this, but I think at some point in the year, Stephen, possibly towards the end of the financial year in the early summer, it might be useful to have an agenda item at the board where the three committees just come together and give a view of what they found throughout the whole year, just focusing very much on systemic issues that might help the executive. I mean, I very much welcome the opportunity a few months ago to work with Mercy, where we had a joint committee meeting, and I think that might be something we could experiment and develop as we go forward.
You see, I think that's a helpful suggestion, because effectively, 1 year ago we set up the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee and also the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee. So they're relatively new committees, whereas the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee has been in place for many years and is a statutory requirement to have anyway. So on that basis, I think we always set up the new committees to use some of the best practice from ARAC. It would be good to test that out to make sure it's actually coming together. Right?
I think it also help any interdependence between the committees. Because we're going through quite a lot of change that we discussed earlier, it's incredibly important that nothing falls through the cracks. Because at the end of the day, the business of the agency is a seamless business.
Yeah.
You know, it's an end-to-end thinking that needs to happen.
I think it works both ways, actually, doesn't it? Because I think we need to make sure nothing slips between the cracks.
Yeah.
Similarly, we need to make sure we don't duplicate, because our executive are busy enough without having to do things twice. So I think that's where the collaboration between the committee chairs is going to be
And if
particularly
we do that by design,
Yeah.
right, as opposed to just being happening organically or dynamically, it'll just ensure it gets done.
Okay. So June, does that work for you?
It really does. And I think we said right at the beginning with the assurance committees that we needed to look for those interdependencies and really build them. So by design, let's have a look with the chairs of the committees and clearly your view too, how we best gear that. So that might be timing, it might be cross look at similar topics to get both angles. There could be a number of ways to build those synergies.
And we've kind of started this, haven't we? Because ARAC and PSEC have kind of collaborated on things.
And you've got a second meeting
We've
planned.
got a second meeting planned. And also with organisational development, we've kind of looked at culture. So I've certainly inputted into that committee, but we haven't formally come together as a committee. But there might be specific subjects that it might be really useful to.
Well, bear in mind, you know, as it says on the poster, putting patients first.
Yeah.
You know, that clearly crosses across, you know, patient safety and engagement committee, but also the type of culture we want to have in the organisation. So there could be an opportunity for collaboration there.
Yeah. And I think the other link is back with internal audit and testing the controls and making sure that that's we've got input from the committees there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I think Natalie, we should just record an action there to. I'm not sure exactly when, but it's for the committees to review their combined effectiveness. I think is how I would sum it up, and let's have a board discussion on that very topic. Okay, that would be great. So, with that comment aside, can I just ask if people are content in principle with the schedule that we've got, and they will continue to build on it? Okay, that's great. Right. Well, thank you very much for that. So that moves us on to the next substantive item on the agenda, which is the current issues from the CEO's point of view. So June, you can assume we've read it, but what are the key points you'd like to raise?
Well, thank you, Stephen. Clearly, this brings together the current issues and looks for board's consideration and any advice on prioritisation. So to allow maximum time for that discussion, I'll just highlight one or two clear messages. It's a long report. Obviously, since we last met, there's been a lot happening. Agency very busy with our end-to-end process in a number of areas. But I think I'd like to stress how much of a priority we're still giving healthcare access, particularly around the vaccines, which remain our first line of defence in the current health situation. We've clearly approved Pfizer and AZ as boosters. And it's interesting to see now that the vaccination of the 12 to 15-year-old children is now starting. This is only possible with gearing of our systems with JCVI and the other NHS deployment arms. So huge amount of work there. And not to forget that the batch release that NIBS undertakes is vital. I think we're up to well over 130 million doses, which, you know, these are going into the arms of everyone in the UK. And that's quite phenomenal that those checks on purity and potency are absolutely the bedrock of trust in the vaccines. We already mentioned our innovative licensing and access pathway. It's landed really well. We've projected about 40 applications in a year. We're above, I think, 57 now in the time since January. And what a wealth of innovation there, not just as we expected new cancer treatments to be coming through, but we're also seeing, for example, osteoarthritis and what a burden that is on healthcare and on health itself. So it's landed really well. We've got to see this through to the next phase of the target delivery profiles. So the next phase from an innovation passport through to bespoke development. Really important that we see patient safety as our top priority, of course, and the proactive monitoring of the vaccines remains a very big aspect of our resource deployment. And important that we have topic reviews, such as the heart inflammation with the mRNA vaccines, period problems, which seem to have led to a lot of reports, and colleagues may have seen the BMJ article recently, pregnancy and breastfeeding, the assurance that women need to have. So the topic reviews can be quite a major effort, but delivered in a timely way, they maintain that level of confidence. In terms of patient involvement, isotretinoin review, the important acne treatment, has for the first time had 3 sessions with patients and families. And that really is a landmark for us. It's been a very, very rich discussion indeed. So Chair, I'll just finish by saying that with all of that going on, we have to say it's our staff who have been key to delivering. And at this time of change, I think to really acknowledge the efforts, the extent that people are going to go the extra mile to be sure that the public are protected and have the kind of access to products that they need. Our transformation programme is gathering pace. We have over 60 transformation champions who are our executive outreach, eyes, ears, and discussions that flow when those local discussions need to be tailored to local views and needs. Very active indeed. Our champions really are our right arms from the executive point of view. So really, it's the innovation, it's the access and patient safety that I think you can see in these pages. Very happy to answer questions and to encourage that prioritisation, Chair, that you want to see happen. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, June. I think certainly for new members of the board, you know, I continue to be impressed, and I've been on the board for 5 years. I continue to be impressed by the breadth and depth of responsibility that the agency has. And I think the work that the agency is doing is outstanding. It really is, at a time of, you know, immense change and pressure that people are under. So I think it's right to record our thanks to all our staff for all the incredible work that they're doing. So with that as the initial context, colleagues, any questions? Because there's a lot of things we could talk about. But Junaid.
So I just wanted to echo everything. I mean, just standing on the sidelines of the last year, I think the work that the MHRA has done has been extraordinary. So my sincere thanks to all the staff. I was really curious to think about the global context of our work now too. So I think if the pandemic has shown us anything, we're part of a global community. And I was pleased to see the work that we're doing in and around the international side of things. But how competitive are we? And how do we set ourselves an even higher bar, I suppose, in the next year, to think about that close collaboration with some of our international groups in terms of both research that happens in the UK, but then accelerated paths forward for novel technologies. I just wondered, June, if you had any thoughts on the international side of things as well.
Excellent. Well, it's a key priority in our delivery plan, and the board has endorsed a strategy with very specific deliverables, which I think is where Junaid is coming from on this, that being out there and talking and meeting and having memoranda of understanding is not what this is about. It's about meaningful outcomes. I think building from COVID, it has given us quite purposeful interactions, and our 100 days mission that the regulator has a very important deliverable in, particularly around international collaboration on clinical trials, will actually make sure that the UK is the best place to help develop and push forward this international delivery. But I think you're right to mention technology too. We work with the IMDRF, as you probably realise, as a way again to have that international, if you like, focus on what is needed, rather than, it's like a global delivery, rather than just looking at all the individual jurisdictions. There's a lot more to be done, but I think our strategy puts us in a good place to do that. And I think, again, as we deliver the strategy, to revisit it from time to time, have we got the right focus? In terms of access, it's around Australia, Canada, Switzerland, Singapore, who we're in touch with almost daily, I have to say. And I can talk about Singapore and Australia as of yesterday. So that's very, very active. But there are also important bilaterals, non-technology, that's the FDA. And you'll have noticed that we're delivering a new guideline on AI with the FDA. So it's important that we choose our partnerships for the most productive outcomes. A long answer by saying it's very active, and our transformation puts us in a really good place to continue the work.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
And maybe just building on that, June, there's also, let's not forget Europe. because actually we've got very ongoing dialogue with our European regulatory colleagues, particularly on the safety side.
Definitely, we have maintained and want to enhance an extremely productive interaction because we were, if you like, one of the first to get the vaccination campaigns running. We effectively detected signals that we were then able to discuss with EU partners. So there's a number of areas where we have very active liaison, and that can only improve. The International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities is led by the European Medicines Agency, and that provides a very nice platform that we can actually enhance our relationship with EMA in.
So I think that's an important component, that we're outside of the European network, but we're still collaborating, particularly in the area of safety. So, Raj.
I'd like to just build on that, because our relationship internationally is even more critical now than it was pre-Brexit.
Just speak up.
Our international collaboration, I think, is even more important now than it was pre-Brexit. It was important then, but I would say it's more pertinent now. And picking up on what June said, I was personally in certain platforms when we were looking at safety post-COVID. And because the UK was, and thanks to our agency and all the staff in the agency, we were the first to approve the first vaccine. In safety, data is everything. It's what informs you. So we were able to use the data that we had to inform other regulatory agencies in terms of what they were looking for. And as the other agencies started collating their own data, they were able to either reinforce what we knew or bring new information in. So it's important even on the technical side. That's the point I want to make, because we pull and push information. And when it comes to safety, you'll never have enough data to inform, change, confirm, all of that. So I think it's a really important element. So that's on the technical side. There is another aspect I think we should also consider as we look at international relationships is we work with the EMA and the FDA, as June shared. These are higher resource countries, and they have got systems and processes in place that can move forward. But we should also engage with the lower middle income countries. Why? Because they are lower resourced and they're incredibly creative. And we might be able to learn from them too, because we're all resource constrained. There's no agency that says we have more resource than we need. So being able to work and be flexible, and I think where we are now, I would say, having the independence of being a jurisdiction post-Brexit, being a agency that is independent of other agencies, it's an incredible opportunity for the agency to start building on that, because we will benefit and others can also benefit from that.
I think that's very, very true. Very true. Mercy.
2 comments and 2 questions, if that's okay, Stephen. My comments are public sector research establishment status, brilliant, very good. And grant funding for UK stem cell bank. When I joined, we were really struggling with that. So this is so great to actually have that confirmed and have it kind of stable for a few years. So excellent in both those. My questions, first of all, is about the transformation programme. And I've been listening in to kind of some of the staff engagement kind of processes that chief officers have been doing as well. And I just wanted to know, how's it going about involving staff in designing new ways of working? Because that's such an important part of the transformation, that the people are actually who are kind of delivering at the moment. And a part of that as well is about business as usual, because I think some of the concerns staff have is about delivering as is, at the same time undergoing this quite large transformation. And I was just wanting some feedback really about both those elements.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Really is key to the success of the transformation. Before we talk about that, can I just reinforce what you said about the significance of becoming a public sector research establishment, not just for our scientists down at South Mims, but the whole agency. And that really is a great coup, and thanks to the colleagues that achieved that. In terms of the stem cell bank, there's a workshop on Thursday that's attracting a lot of researchers who see that this is just a tremendous asset, the biggest stem cell bank in the world, and we've supported research worldwide. So that step to get the NIHR funding in the bank is key to the future, and we can only see growth coming from that area. Absolutely vital. In terms of designing new ways of working, that really is the focus now. I think colleagues will understand that the first part of our engagement has been the overall destination and the concepts like the life cycle and so forth. But actually the systems design is now the top priority. And to get those who wish to see, as we're an independent sovereign regulator, some of the freedoms that will come from that, moving from a system that was geared to achieving a decision 28 ways, to one that actually is nimble and engaged with our NHS, our NICE, our CQC and others. That's going to be the bedrock of new ways of working. So we've got the recipe, which is largely an innovative licensing and access pathway of integrated delivery. Our systems and processes need to follow that. And we're at the design stage, particularly with the technology roadmap. But that is, I hope, contextualized in the benefits that we will see. But it's the big piece of work now.
Mercy, do you want to come back?
Yeah, and I was just wondering about that. As we do that transformation, concerns around business as usual and still delivering, because it's obvious you're still delivering, but you know, obviously addressing some of those concerns and things. I kind of get from the delivery plan and kind of the priorities which are on amber, which we're going to discuss later. I certainly think you're picking up some of those kind of issues from staff, but I just wanted your kind of feedback on that, about making sure that we continue business as usual as this transformation goes on.
There's no doubt, as you say, that there are areas of pressure. Executive committee periodically, and in fact it's on our agenda pretty much every week, looks at where those pressures are and what resource deployment.
Look at what we've put forward in the transformation and start to understand where we need to make tweaks, changes to make sure we're meeting those concerns. So it's absolutely fundamental. We're now also getting to the design stage. At the moment, I've got NIP senior managers are looking very closely at the structure, as in they are actually having daily meetings to understand how it works together, and they're beginning to come back with some proposals I'm just hearing. At this point, we've got a good 2/3 of the consultation period to go. We're going to have quite a strong portfolio of suggestions. And I haven't yet mentioned, I've also, with my new responsibilities, got the clinical trials unit, who are also absolutely gagging for a meeting, which I will have as soon as possible, in order for us to get this together. It's drawing it together and then understanding the checks and measures. It's been said, we don't have resources for everything. We've got to have the right balance point to deliver. But it's actually very exciting. People are so engaged, so pushing. We're working to reassure them. We're working to get these good ideas into the process.
Yeah, and Alison, if I can maybe just bring you in similarly, obviously you're involved in engaging staff. I know that. Is there any sort of other feedback to help answer Mercy's question?
Absolutely. I think following the sort of communication of more details around the design, for me, staff want to know operationally how it will work, how will the processes actually work in practice. And I think going forward during our consultation period, I want to put in place workshops to enable those sort of more in-depth discussions of how signals will move through the process. How will teams where devices and medicines team work together function operationally? How will some of the sign-offs work? All of these details we're going to work through in the next sort of few weeks. Yeah. And I think hopefully that will bring reassurance to staff, but also be incredibly valuable for us to have their input into the process and understand their views and take on board their views.
Yeah, and taking the opportunity to streamline where we can. Absolutely. And to ensure that every step adds value, because that isn't always been the case in the past, as I understand it. So, okay. And John, just from your point of view, as the director responsible for HR in the organisation, is there anything you want to add?
Well, I guess our key corporate areas were probably slightly ahead of the curve, which is for various reasons. We looked at finance, commercial procurement and HR, and also to a certain extent CPRD sort of earlier as well. So finance, for example, are on the second phase of the transformation activity about processes and tools. So we probably did that slightly earlier, I think. On the HR perspective, we consciously decided to put more resource into HR, you know, going perhaps slightly against the trend. And we've agreed that we'll review them again once we've gone through the entire change process. And we've deliberately pulled in more resource on HR to support some of the key transition activities around, you know, the day-to-day transformation activities around role descriptions, selection process, etc. So we started up.
Okay, Mercy, does that add some colour?
Yeah, no, that's very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
And you had another point, I think.
Yes, on something completely different. So for the, I think the NIPS Meet the Employer initiative, which sounds really interesting. This Aspire Higher, is it addressing diversity as well? Is it encouraging kind of new people into the, is that
Probably
possible?
Mark would be the best person to give the detail. Yeah.
Well, yes, we absolutely need to talk about diversity. And you and I were actually touching on this just before the meeting. So yes, diversity within NIPS. We've got excellent gender diversity through multiple levels, but we are basically critically underrepresented in paying, you know, multiple levels as well. This is across civil service and cross country matter when it comes to science. So, well, we're looking very much at any way we can improve the diversity. This transformation will give us an opportunity to address it, but it is a worry that effectively there is the pool that we're drawing talent from also has got these diversity problems. So I'm not promising a kind of any solution. This is a very long-term issue to get this working, and I will welcome any ideas from any sources on how we can improve the diversity.
So I guess when we're looking at partnerships and making that pool bigger,
yes,
is and looking further down upstream, as it were, that we need to kind of be working with other people on that.
Absolutely.
Good. Okay, that's great. So, Paul, can I bring you in?
So a different question really, and we've had a great discussion earlier around the subcommittees, that they were not overlapping, but also we didn't have any gaps either. So we're focused, but thinking about the broader journey of how we get a medicine to a patient or device and taken safely and effectively, there are so many different actors involved beyond MHRA, and sort of thinking about Cumberledge achieving the Cumberledge aims. Do those other actors have similar processes in place, similar reviews, and how are we interacting with all of those other actors?
It's a complex system when you stand outside, but very simple on the inside. And I hope I can assure you that the independence of the scientific structure, where decisions, proposals are signed off from the staff, there'll be independent expert advice if it's a critical decision, and then clearly government will decide after that. We're, as operational managers, looking at the performance, the timing, the prioritization, and clearly board looks at assurance. So I hope that perhaps
the other parts of the system. And so I think ILAP is the classic
that's a
example of
classic
working
example
with
of
NICE
integration.
and with the Scottish Medicines Consortium, for example. But I think we need to build on more of those, because part of our partnership strategy was international partnerships, which we've mentioned, but also the national partnerships within the UK health system. And I think actually the big prize for me is how we interact with the NHS on a much more proactive basis than maybe we've been able to do in the past.
I think ILAP is a good start, but it doesn't go right the way through to prescriber and behaviours, and it deals with new stuff coming through, but not all of the legacy medicines.
Well, it should, because the definition for innovation is broad and repurposing is definitely there. A drug like dexamethasone in COVID, it wasn't an ILAP drug, but it's that concept that builds on from discovery, development through to deployment. So we certainly have the map, and the NHS is round the table with ILAP, but you're right, Stephen, that there should be more flow of that approach. My mantra with the team at the moment is there's no medicine that's a non-ILAP is there a medicine that we look at that we don't want to reach people? No. So it's building on that concept. And when we deploy our new systems, they will make integration happen by default, rather than a member of staff needing to think through what's the population use of this therapeutic. So it's the thinking's there. Now I think we need the triggers in the system so that it stops being an add-on, but actually part of the process.
And I think there's multiple levels, Paul, because there's also the working relationship at the clinical trials level to start with. Yeah, that, which is one of the reasons why the organisational structure is, we want to gear around innovation, access and safety, because actually each of those have got different sets of relationships across the UK health system. And actually data is going to be the key to this. And bringing the data in from the NHS, and that's why our relationships with NHS Digital and so forth are going to be important. So I think there's a rich seam of further discussion that we'll need to have. But I think the point you've made is very well placed, that this is got to be a critical part of some of the things we need to do, if that's okay.
I think just building on Paul's point and what David Webb made quite often, we also need to be working not just with the NHS, but with the professional bodies for prescribers, for doctors and all of the Royal Colleges, because that was a key part of Cambridge as well, taking that responsibility. So I think we shouldn't forget that. It's not just the HSC.
So obviously David gave you the fiver beforehand. So. but David was completely right. Linking it back through to the prescriber is crucial, and also getting the feedback both ways in terms of safety signals as well as safety information, as well as effectiveness. Michael, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, really positive news about the innovative pathway. And I just build on something that I remember Mandy raising in a different board. How does industry see this? We've got 57 applications. Is that geared towards bigger pharmaceuticals, or if I'm a smaller pharmaceutical startup or whatever, is the system as easy for me to get involved in it than if I was a big pharmaceutical? It's that the quality of access I'm particularly interested in.
No, definitely, definitely. For small and medium startups, academics, it's a completely inclusive system, and that bespoke creation of a pathway takes out all the I've got to learn a new system. If you happen to be a major international pharma, you don't need that level of insight into how the system works. But if you're a startup, if you're someone who says, I've got a few new gene therapies, we should be there for you as well. And that's exactly how it's geared, with really intensive work to take the guesswork out and the clunkiness out for someone who isn't geared up with a very large regulatory team behind them. We've got good models, actually, and you will have seen some of those. Possibly in the past.
I'm really assured by that, Jen. And just, are we communicating that? If I was out there, I would know that was the way.
That is definitely the aim. We can always communicate more and communicate better. And in fact, I've mentioned to the team we should do an update. We've had, 8-9 months just about of experience. Now's the time to say, this is how you really use the system, not just here it is. And getting your passport, getting your target development profile. And the big message from COVID that this is two-way traffic. It isn't we disseminate, it's a dialogue. So it's from advice to dialogue. And that way people are able to be helped through the system and avoiding getting stuck somewhere or getting lost from view.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, great. Raj, I think you had a point.
Thank you. Just again, building on what June just spoke about, connecting the dots. You've got innovation, and clearly iLab is really a driver of that, and it's taking you from discovery development to access. I think one of the things that will encourage innovation to come to the UK as well, right? I'm just not talking, is I call it the one-stop shop. Developers, we often underplay the role. If you're in private sector, regulators are seen as one of the quote unquote major hurdles. Right, that's how it's seen. You've got to go through all of these regulatory checks and balances to come through. I think iLab really helps bring that into perspective, for the agency. But we also have so many other resources here in the context. If you look at the agency itself, it has CPRD, it has NIBS, it has the agency itself, and then now you're building bridges with, connecting with NICE. if we look at a map, and you might have done this already within the agency, but just a thought here as a newcomer, if you could sort of map in these three big segments of discovery, development, and access, and figure out what are the resources we have in the UK that's available to us, like the NHS, NICE, and connect those dots, you'll actually enable the UK to be seen as a much more attractive place to come and do innovation. Because very often developers have to figure out all these pieces. Where do they do the first in man? Where would they do their phase 2? But the UK has got this history of doing this regularly. And now I think it's a fantastic opportunity to bring all of that. And maybe the agency becomes the forerunner and the lead to help connect the dots at the level of what's available here, because that will inevitably help innovation, no matter where it is, to come to the UK. And I think that's really important in the current climate.
And I think that really fits really well with the life sciences vision that the government's published, actually. And I think the MHRA is what was mentioned on 22 of the 50 pages, I think. So I think we need to be careful that we manage expectations, because the MHRA is absolutely part of the solution, but it cannot solve everything. But we want to be part of the solution. We want to be part of the system. We need to collaborate. And it's just a matter of making sure we help to join the dots, but we'll need other partners in the system to work with us.
I think it's a component of an integrated solution. That's how we need to see. It's not a single solution, as you say, Chair, but it's a critical component of the integrated, the collective solution. So,
okay.
If I can just, where the board would add value, is that there are points in that journey where we know we could do a lot better. Clinical trials can still be very difficult to navigate, to get going. The NHS interface, as we've said already today. And I think if we look very critically at that journey, that offer, we will actually see the points where we can make even more of what UK offers. I think also the fact that we increase our population capture, if we move from the UK alone, 3% of the world market, to 150 million odd with access, that actually will tick the box for wider use of a new product and wider benefits. But I think there are areas that we're not at all complacent of, and our ability to change the legal framework with the Medicines and Medical Devices Act, we've got to take full advantage of that. There is now an opportunity to actually take out of the law obstructions and clunkiness where it holds up progress because of the legal network framework that we're in. So I think that's a sort of opening that we come back to the board with some key areas of influence that we need to pursue.
And I think that's probably why I would see adding to the board agenda we talked about earlier, because I think there are a number of key components. So clinical trials is definitely on sort of on the view. I think review of ILAP's been on the board in the past and needs to probably come back. What we do with devices, because it's not just about medicines, because ILAP is currently a medicines only process, but there's definitely a need for devices and so forth. So I think we'll use the board, the experience we've got around the table, to review different components of this at various stages over the next sort of few months. Will be my view. But, okay, I think I'm just conscious of time, but I think we've had quite a rich discussion there, but particularly around the priority of international, particularly around the priority on the internal, on staff engagement and involvement in the way that we work to make ourselves more efficient. There's definitely a big, rich theme around how we help to join up the UK health system, and there's absolutely the agency's crucial role in the innovation agenda. And so there were probably the four key themes, I think, of today's discussion that I think were just emphasised, particularly June. But I think on that note, I'd just like to thank you for your report, really. and just to note that with great thanks to our staff, as we said earlier. I think that takes us on to the next item, which is then to a more performance-based discussion. And so on page 35, we've got the balanced scorecard. John, you can assume we've read it, but are there any particular points you'd like to bring to the board's attention before we go into discussion?
Thank you, Chair. So perhaps just a bit of context, I guess, for newer board members and also perhaps members of the public. So what you see here is effectively a maturing product, for want of a better term. We decided to develop the balanced scorecard to track the key aspects of our delivery plan. The development took a while because, to be honest, it's a new concept for the agency. Historically, I think the agencies tended to focus on retrospective input measures rather than the perhaps measures of outcome or output. So eventually we decided to actually just start putting it into production, run it for a few cycles and then revise. And I think we're coming up to that revision point. In terms of the design, those of you familiar with the normal Kaplan-Norton HBR four segments, we've tweaked it and invented 6 segments, but a lot of them map across. The targets which you see in this version are relatively recent introductions. A lot of them are quite volatile after our exit from the EU. So, for example, national applications, we're seeing a surge on what actually should be the underlying recurring business level. So we know we have more work to do in that area. A couple of the measures are still under development. So you'll see productivity and reputational, for example, is marked as sample data. We'll have productivity for the next iteration, and reputational index, we're going to engage an external provider for that information, and that procurement is underway. We're also trying to, as is the nature of these things, initially it was kind of spreadsheet based, cobbled together slightly. We've now put in place apps to collect the data underlying it and looking to smooth that process with the underlying technology being Power BI, etc. So I'll open it up for comments and questions. It would also be helpful to discuss how we can get your feedback and take the next iteration forward, perhaps either through a survey or through the 3 assurance committees, with perhaps a target for November, which will be the next full quarterly version of reflecting any changes of that discussion. So grateful for any questions either on the actual metrics, but also how we can improve this going forward, particularly for those that have experience of similar things in your own organisations.
Yeah, well, thank you, John. As John knows, I was very keen to keep this on the board agenda, even though it was still in development, because I think this needs to iterate and it will continue to evolve. And rather than waiting for 10 years to get the perfect product, it was more important to start the journey. And that's the approach that we've taken. So, colleagues, are there any specific questions or suggestions? Mandy?
Yeah, no, I appreciate John, and this is developing each time. So I think it's good to see this there. One of the things that came very strongly out to me was that there's quite a few of the targets and that are set there which are outside our control. So I think where you've got applications coming in or there's clinical trials, that's the market coming in, and that gives us a really good snapshot of what's going on out there. But in terms of a balanced scorecard and for managing the organisation and its effectiveness, I think we have to have targets which were within our control. So it gives a good idea to see, you know, the sorts of variations we're having or applications, but actually how many are going through on time, and what is it, and always coming back to asking the question, it might be in the sort of dialogue, is what impact is it having on patients? And even if it's a variation, is it actually better for a national generic application to come through this process, or do we actually need, you know, and so that goes through, that helps the patient, and actually our more specialist resource would maybe go into to more ILAP because that seems to be more popular. That's just an example. But I think really understanding the things that we can tweak to improve